And in a break from our publicized programming, we now go live to Punk Politics with Aid Thompson.
Ladies and gents, welcome back to Punk Politics. I'm Aid Thompson. The last week has been a fiery haze of chaos and mayhem. It's left most of us feeling like we've been strapped to a chair and had a fire hydrant blast sadness directly into our eyeballs. Former US presidents have been acting up.
That has angered the president, and he has stormed out of the courtroom.
Privately educated and publicly entitled MPs have been doing what they always do.
Peter Bone, the MP for Wellingborough, has been suspended for 6 weeks after being accused of bullying and sexual misconduct by a junior member of staff.
Amanda, Crispin Blunt choosing to name himself in this arrest.
And a high-profile, yet curiously underreported inquiry has been bubbling up in the background. All of that and more. But first, this. What the f*** is that? Across to the States first then, as Donald Trump performatively threw his hands in the air and stormed out of his New York fraudulent documents trial. Not to be confused with his Florida stolen documents trial, which is not to be confused with his DC stolen election trial. This is the Michael Cohen one, but not to be confused with the other Michael Cohen one. This one is the civil case for Trump Org, where he allegedly inflated his assets to get bigger loans and pretend he was a billionaire, which is a sort of real estate showboat equivalent of your mate Dave down the pub pulling out his Amex card to impress the girls, like, yeah, baby, American Express, 30k limit. Wow, big baller. Oh, and wait, is that a NatWest Visa in there as well? Oh, yeah. Double gauge, both loaded. Uh-huh. And hang on, is that a brand new car outside? Yeah, baby, Jaguar F-Type on finance. Right. And check out this personal loan and these 3 maxed out overdrafts as well. Okay, this has weirdly become unimpressive. No, wait, don't, where are you going? No, honestly, I have to, because I've got to be, I've got to be somewhere that isn't here. Meanwhile, there's a load of MAGA cretins still, like in the corner of the bar, like, but he's rich because he got stacks of money in his pocket, so that must mean he rich. Anyway, yes, Donald Trump stormed out of his New York civil case fraud trial after observing testimony from his turncoat ex-lawyer, Michael Cohen. Cohen went to jail for 3 years after he was convicted for his role in breaking campaign finance law and lying to Congress. Now, during and after that trial, it was suggested that his former boss pretty much cut him adrift. And just like the Florida property manager, whom he allegedly asked to delete CCTV just before that Mar-a-Lago raid, that Trump had left Cohen painfully exposed to the American legal system with no help on the legal fees and facing a life-ruining prison sentence. Which really kind of gets to the core of the dynamic between someone like Trump and his friends and colleagues. You know, I really think Trump is like, well, I'm sorry that you got in trouble for me. I know that you probably thought that we were colleagues or friends, or that this was reciprocal, or that I would even reward your loyalty, but I'm afraid not. I see this very much as me being the emperor, and you being the martyred believer, slain to my glory. And then Cohen's like, yeah, could I get a plea deal? Which I have to say, I'm always a fan of. Like, I love to observe right-wingers adopting this sort of hilarious short-termist mentality. And it doesn't matter if it's Trump, or Sunak, or Truss, or Johnson. It's always hysterical to watch. This innate need to take the quickest route to convenience, no matter the long-term issues it might cause you. Like, watching it happen again and again. Like, it's my new favourite comedy genre. The short-termism of right-wingers. Like, it's never not amusing to see the right bring themselves down. Or perhaps, if I could put it more succinctly, it's always funny in Kill Yourselfia. Like, I mean, I'm talking primarily about Trump in this instance, but we see it over here too, right? You know, with Team Blue's 3-word slogans and their obsession about getting them out of trouble or getting the right messaging with the newspapers that day or that week. And to hell with the problems or the complications that it might cause 3 months or 6 months down the line. Like, we saw it with Braverman just a few weeks ago, when she pushed out her illegal migration act to appease the flag-waving readers of the Daily Express, only to find out that in so doing, because the act was making it a criminal offence to rock up to the UK uninvited. Like, you sort of have to apply for asylum from overseas now before you rock up on the beaches of Dover or whatever. Because of that change, that tweak, because of her thirst for the votes of Express readers, that tweak would now push Britain outside of the international watchdog for AIDS parameters to be able to qualify for the 9.6 billion that it gets to put towards asylum seeker accommodation. So, short-term strategy to get all of the racists on board, and oh God, what is that? It's just bit me in the arse. It's a accommodation bill for almost 10 billion. That right-wing, short-termist mentality. And over in the US, you see it with Trump, with episodes like this. This sort of deluded sociopath who fails to detect any of the risks with cutting his fixer lawyer adrift. The guy who knows where the bodies are buried and then publicly disparaging him and insulting him to boot? Like, didn't you think that might cause you some problems, Donny? You don't think Michael Cohen might have taken a bit of offence to that? Tried to cut a deal and sing like a canary? Trump also received his second gag order fine this week. Previously, he was fined $5,000 for failing to remove an online post mocking a court clerk. Now he's been fined another 10 grand for saying, "This judge is a very partisan judge." Oh, $15,000 hit when you're already broke. Christ. How are you even going to pay that? $15,000. Oh my God. Well, time to call Deutsche Bank. Donny, no! Personally, I really like the idea that with every outburst, every interruption, Trump is actually championing socialism. Because the state of New York has a $160 billion debt. And honestly, if Trump carries on like this, he might f*** around and put them into credit. This is a sham trial. The whole thing is a witch hunt. The judge is a crook. Meanwhile, over in the governor's office, they're like, Miss Hutchell, you know we were talking about the state debt earlier? Yes, what is it, Matthew? Well, it's the weirdest thing. I just checked the accounts, and we are in a $300 million surplus. Like, $5,000 for saying this thing, and 10 grand for that. I suppose, in essence, Trump's court fines are sort of like, him paying money to say horrible things. That's basically it, isn't it? It's like cash for abuse. And I have to say, I quite like that. That's why I'm considering setting up a totally separate tier on my Patreon for people who absolutely f***ing hate me. That is a £3 and a £5 and a £10 and then, oh, what's this? £1,000 a month? And I get to phone you personally, Aid, and call you a buck-toothed, big-eared cunt. I'm serious. Like, let me know if you want to sign up for that, because I'll set it up. Anyway, the civil or uncivil case so far seems to come down to who asked Michael Cohen and others to jack up the value of each of these properties, and what the court understands to be instruction or direction to do so. And so, yeah, all of this started with, his lawyers, their convictions, their jail time. Now it's crescendoed to the Latin-adorned corridors of New York's civil litigation world, and indeed specifically to the big dog himself. I guess they've grabbed him by the per se. Meanwhile, in the formerly Great Britain, the internet went into a frenzy Thursday night as reports that a blue-rosetted MP had been arrested on suspicion of rape and possession of a prohibited substance. I bet it was NOS canisters. I told you they're bad.
The Conservative MP, Crispin Blunt.
Crispin Blunt has confirmed he...
Crispin Blunt reveals he...
Crispin Blunt later outed himself as the suspect in question, but caveated the admission with, "The arrest was unnecessary, as I remain ready to cooperate fully with an investigation, one that I am confident will end without charge." I don't think that's how arrests work, mate. Like, I don't think you get to say, I don't know why you're dragging me all the way down to the station. You've got nothing on me. Like, if you were the police, would you really be like, if the guy accused of the crime says that this is all a waste of time, well, maybe we've got this whole thing all wrong, Gov. I can imagine this whole episode is probably very aggravating for the police, who will be forced to exhaust valuable time taking his fingerprints, processing the allegations, taking statements, his denial. All of that will have taken invaluable time away from officers committing their own sex crimes. I mean, seriously, like how How is any member of the police supposed to exert any moral authority over anyone accused of a crime like this now? It's like, have you committed a sex offence? Have you? Whoa! Blunt becomes the 57th current serving MP to be under investigation for an alleged violent or sexual offence. 57! God! It's almost like a second job, isn't it? Like, how wild is it to think that 57 out of 350 of them are being investigated? Like, that is like a 16% chance that the MP that you're speaking to is a wrong'un. It's like, it's almost 60 of them. And like, for context, think about how many MPs are landlords and think about what impact that has on property and rental legislation. Think about how there's 30 members of the ERG and the influence they're able to command over the Brexit deal that we agreed. Now take those 30 and double it to 60 and just join me as I wonder what truly abhorrent lobbying might be going on when you've got 60 of these lunatics. But they're like, you know, the real ERG, but for wrong'uns. New Tory squad lobbying to be only subject to Vatican-style courts rather than face actual justice. I mean, you know, I'm joking, obviously, but they would if they could. Elsewhere in Team Blue, Starmer is enjoying, while Sunak is enduring, another published 25-point lead, this time from YouGov. That puts his lot ahead of, I mean, it's been about 25 points for like a year now, hasn't it? Or 24, I don't even know how long. And this is while Sunak's personal approval rating continues to plummet. Indeed, there has been no post-conference bounce for Rishi, and this is now being acknowledged even by like right-wing commentators like Tim Montgomery.
I don't think people are listening to the Conservatives anymore. We have passed our sell-by date.
So Team Blue are looking cooked, done. But that is, of course, reality. And if you're not a fan of, you know, news and current affairs, there is always the fiction section, the fantasy section, where the towering intellects of the Telegraph and indeed Sunak himself continue to dwell.
Very quickly, yes or no, do you think you're going to win the next election?
Yes.
Do you think you will win the general election if it was held in 12 months, within 12 months?
Well, yes.
With each one of them banging on about tax cuts, but no clear indicator on how they would pay for any of them. Oh, we'll just put it on the Amex or the NatWest Visa, or is there an asset that we could inflate or something? Rishi, no! My own personal theory is that Sunak has basically just given up at this point. That's why you're seeing him revert to type so extremely. Like, think about the stuff that they actually should be working on right now. Like, you don't hear much about those 40 new hospitals, do you? Or realising the benefits of Brexit. When was the last time that you heard any of them talk up any of the 2019 manifesto commitments that they were elected on? Instead, he's using his remaining weeks in power to float and promote as many quintessentially posh boy policies as he can. And so, what are we hearing about? Are we hearing about new hospitals or fixing the schools? How about that ready-to-go social care policy? No. Like, none of it. It's all like, oh, we've got to cut taxes. How, though? We've got to sign off the BP licenses. But everyone voted you in on your net zero commitments. Right, I've got it. We should abolish inheritance tax. Like, well, where is that coming from? And as Sunak's time gets closer to its sunset period, talk of a future leader of Team Blue begins to crystallise. Now, there's obviously a lot of chat about Suella, Kemi, maybe Priti Patel, but equally, there was a lot of talk recently about old Nige rejoining the party and potentially becoming its leader as they move into opposition. And so, please step forward, Ian Duncan Smith, who becomes the latest guest star in Keeping Up with the Faragians by suggesting that all party members should boycott NatWest in support of old Nige, following his well-documented consumer rights crusade over that debanking nonsense. I mean, that would be fun. That would be fun. Like, if Team Blue did all boycott NatWest. Like, if it was just something they would never consider anymore. Like asking Liverpudlians to read The Sun, you know? It'd just be a funny sight, I think. Like, racist, blue-rosetted MPs, or, you know, candidates to be so, each of whom will have a rich history rebuking the idea, dismissing the idea of things like institutional racism and ridiculing diversity training. What a load of rubbish. And then in the same breath, on a picket line, decrying NatWest's lack of inclusivity. I will never bank with you again. I will never bank with you again. I feel very oppressed. People walking by like, you don't look it. And finally, the inquiry that nobody is talking about, or at least nobody subject to whatever weird voluntary or involuntary reporting restrictions appear to be in place throughout the mainstream media. Anyway, we can talk about it, can't we? This inquiry is set to heat up even further. This is after Hancock demanded he be given immunity from prosecution for the revelations he would be forced to reveal. Johnson's missing 6 months of WhatsApps, Sunak's mysteriously lost phone that is still connected and is receiving calls, Simon Case just getting signed off sick for a few weeks, so he regrettably can't appear at the inquiry. On Thursday night's video, I asked a question like, what is it that you think that they've all done that is so bad that they're this scared about showing their messages? And then the next day, this video from George Osborne appeared on Twitter.
So I think get ready for some pretty shocking messages.
I think you know more about this than you're telling us.
Well, I've got to be a little bit careful here. It's a judicial inquiry, but from what I understand, there is some pretty staggering things that have been said on those WhatsApp messages by not just Boris Johnson, but key advisors like Dominic Cummings. Really pretty disgusting language and misogynistic language.
Wow! Misogyny? I don't believe it. Must be really bad if the guy who said he wanted Theresa May chopped up in bags in his freezer finds it distasteful. The funny thing is, I mean, those texts will probably come out eventually. And when they do, it's going to be hugely embarrassing for the government. And that's going to be on top of the probably quite damaging testimony we expect to hear from Lee Cain and Dominic Cummings this week. Personally, I hope Boris Johnson is in the gallery for those two. Johnson fired Cummings, who began leaking damaging stories and texts to the press. A source credited as an ally of Cummings and Cain had claimed that Johnson's wife Carrie calls his private office about 20 times a day, telling him to leave important meetings to call her back, and that they all privately referred to her as Princess Nutnuts. I wonder what new gems are going to come out when these two take the stand. It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's like politics has become a rap battle, but with really privately educated Peter principals who think disparaging nicknames like Princess Nutnuts and Captain Hindsight are the peak of British humour. And what will the people whom they discuss, what will their responses be? Is Johnson gonna throw his hands up and storm out of the inquiry? I wonder if the world king will be shocked to learn that Cummings doesn't see himself as a sort of cowering, slain martyr to his glory. While we're asking the questions, why is IDS jumping on the Faragian bandwagon? Maybe Nige actually will become their leader. And this weird blitzy bellend is just trying to, get ahead of it. Will Trump end up in jail if he claps his gums and breaks the gag order for the 3rd time? Or are we tacitly accepting that Donald Trump is actually too big to fail, too politically volatile to jail? And if so, if we are accepting that, where does that even leave his succession of trials? That's it for this one. As always, let me know what you think in the comments below. I gotta go.